I don't know which moment was more terrifying, the first time I stepped into Black Pine Forest or when I heard the female orc tell me straight to my face that I had to use my mouth to save her life. My name is Cale Varon, 24 years old, a mapmaker hired by the Travelers Guild in the border town of Millhaven. My job isn't glamorous, measuring distances, marking streams, noting ancient trees, and warning folks where they might die from getting lost. But that day's expedition was nothing like my usual assignments. The Guild had organized a joint venture between humans and orcs, a small test after the peace treaty. They called it a bonding journey. Travel together, eat together, camp together, share maps and stories. It sounded noble. But in Millhaven, prejudices didn't vanish just because of a Lord's red seal. The group numbered 11, 4 from the Guild, including our leader, Master Oren, a grizzled veteran with a knack for diplomacy. 3 local hunters, tough men who'd lost kin in the old wars and weren't shy about muttering under their breath. 2 merchants looking for new trade routes through the wilds. And 2 orcs from the Stonejaw clan invited as goodwill representatives. One of them was Mora Stonejaw, a female orc who towered over me by a full head, with broad shoulders that looked like they could carry a felled tree without breaking stride. Her black hair was braided tight, her golden eyes sharp as a predator's in the underbrush. She didn't mince words or try to play nice. She just stood there, silent, watching everyone like she was measuring heartbeats. I'd met Mora once before at the East Gate when she argued with a guard over toll fees. She won with logic and by simply not budging amid the growing crowd's unease. I remembered that, and I remembered averting my gaze after a second too long, unsure where to put my confidence next to someone who exuded the solidity of a boulder. That morning, we left Millhaven along the trail leading to the forest's edge. The sky was clear, sunlight filtering through the canopy in golden shafts, the air scented with pine resin and damp earth. The group moved in loose clusters. Humans chatted among themselves, orcs kept to their own pace as if maintaining distance was a ritual to prevent misunderstandings. I carried my tools, measuring chains, charcoal ink, waterproof parchment, and a short dagger. I wasn't a warrior. I was the one who charted paths so others could survive following them. Mora walked near the front beside Master Oren. Oren kept reminding everyone, "Stay in formation, no straggling. Black Pine isn't anyone's backyard garden." I heeded him. I always did. Until I heard the first rumble of thunder from afar, low and heavy like a reminder that this forest didn't care about treaties. Mora glanced up at the sky through the leaves. She narrowed her eyes slightly, then said a single, curt phrase, as if commanding the wind itself. "Storms, coming fast." And I had no idea that in just a few hours, I'd be the only one by her side when she collapsed, from a bite right on her thigh. As we pressed deeper into Black Pine, the trail narrowed, flanked by towering pines whose branches intertwined like wary sentinels. The ground was soft underfoot, carpeted in needles that muffled our steps. Birds called sporadically, their songs cutting through the hush, but there was an undercurrent of unease. Black Pine wasn't just any forest. Legends spoke of ancient spirits, hidden pitfalls, and beasts that slithered unseen. The peace treaty had opened borders, but it hadn't tamed the wilds. Master Oren led with a map I'd drawn from older surveys pointing out landmarks. A twisted oak here, a boulder etched with faded runes there. The hunters grumbled about the orc's presence, casting sidelong glances at Mora and Braca, the other Stonejaw orc, a burly male with scars crisscrossing his arms like a map of his own battles. Braca walked silently, his axe slung over one shoulder, but Mora seemed more attuned to the surroundings. She paused occasionally, sniffing the air or touching the bark of a tree as if reading signs I couldn't see. Once she bent down and plucked a small mushroom from the undergrowth, examining it before tossing it aside. "Poisonous," she muttered to no one in particular, but Oren nodded appreciatively. The merchants, plump and laden with sample goods, complained about the pace. "If we don't make good time, our wares will spoil before we map the pass," one said. One of the hunters, a grizzled man named Thorn, snorted. "Wares? We're here to scout, not peddle trinkets! And with them along?" He jerked his head toward the orcs. Mora didn't react, but her jaw tightened. I kept my distance, focusing on my sketches, noting the slope of the land, the direction of streams bubbling nearby. Mapping was my escape. It turned chaos into lines and symbols, something controllable. As the afternoon wore on, the sky darkened prematurely. Clouds gathered like uninvited guests and the wind picked up, rustling leaves with increasing urgency. Oren called a brief halt by a small clearing, where we shared water and dried rations. I sat on a log, unrolling a partial map to add details. Mora approached then, her footsteps heavy but deliberate. She didn't sit, just stood nearby, scanning the horizon. "You map well," she said abruptly, her voice deep and accented like gravel under boots. I looked up, surprised. "Thanks. It's what I do," she nodded once. "Stonejaw have maps too, carved in stone, last longer." I managed a small smile. Parchment's lighter to carry. She didn't laugh, but her eyes flickered with something. Amusement? Curiosity? Before I could say more, thunder rolled again, closer this time. Oren stood. "We push on. Storm's brewing, but we can make the ridge before it hits." As we resumed, Mora fell into step beside me for a moment. "Watch the ground," she warned. "Roots hide in shadows." I nodded, grateful but uneasy. Why was she talking to me? Was it the bonding part of the journey or something else? Little did I know that Storm would force us together in ways no treaty could predict. And soon, her life would depend on my willingness to cross lines I never thought I'd touch. The storm hit Black Pine not like a regular downpour, but as if the sky had been torn open. Winds howled through the trees, bending branches like they were made of straw, and rain lashed horizontally, turning the trail into a muddy river. Shouts from the group mixed with the crack of snapping wood, but everything faded into the roar, distant, then gone. We tried to hold formation. Master Oren yelled for everyone to link arms, to huddle against the gale, but the forest had other plans. A massive pine groaned and crashed down right in the middle of the path, its trunk slamming into the earth like a felled giant. Splinters flew, and the impact shook the ground. People scattered, hunters diving left, merchants scrambling right. I saw Oren's face for a split second, wide-eyed and shouting my name before the curtain of rain swallowed him and the others. I was thrown back by a gust that felt like a shove from an invisible hand. My boots slipped in the muck, and I grabbed at a low branch to steady myself. When I looked up, wiping water from my eyes, the world was a blur of gray and green, no one else in sight. Panic clawed at my chest. Black Pine wasn't forgiving to the lost. Then, through the sheets of rain, I spotted her. Mora, just a few paces away, clinging to a boulder to keep from sliding down the slope. "Kyle!" Her voice cut through the storm, strong and commanding, louder than the wind. I lunged toward her, my heart pounding. She reached out a hand, massive, calloused, and pulled me close enough to steady. "Stay with me!" she barked. We didn't have time to think. The water was rising fast, turning the path into a torrent. I nodded, and we moved together, her leading the way up a rocky incline where the ground was higher, less likely to flood. Her strides were powerful even in the chaos, but I could see her glancing back, making sure I kept up. Rain pelted my face like needles, soaking through my cloak. But I focused on her back, broad and unyielding as a beacon. Every step was a gamble. The mud sucked at our boots, and roots hidden under the flow tried to trip us. Once I slipped hard, my knee slamming into a rock. Pain shot up my leg, but Mora's grip on my arm hauled me up before I could fall into the rush. "Keep moving," she urged, her voice strained but steady. We pressed on, climbing higher along the ridge. The wind whipped branches into our path, and thunder cracked overhead like breaking stone. My mind raced. Marked the direction. Northeast from the fallen tree, water flowing south. If we survived, I'd need to map this hell to warn others. But survival came first. Then she froze. A sharp hiss escaped her lips, raw and pained. Mora staggered back half a step, her hand flying to her right thigh. Her eyes widened in shock, golden irises flashing in the dim light. I rushed to her side. "What happened?" She didn't answer at first, just stared down at her leg. I followed her gaze, and my blood ran cold. Slithering away into the underbrush was a thin brown-black serpent, its scales glistening in the rain. The viper of Black Pine, short fangs, fast venom. I'd heard stories from hunters, one bite, and if untreated, your limb rotted from the inside before your heart gave out. "Snake," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the storm. Mora didn't collapse immediately. She tried to stand tall, but her right leg buckled slightly, forcing her to lean on me. She sank to the ground with a grunt, mud splashing up around us. Her face, usually stoic, twisted in pain. I knelt beside her, my hands shaking as I pushed aside the rain. "Let me see." She nodded grimly and pulled up the edge of her leather armor in the fabric beneath, exposing the wound. 2 puncture marks, red and angry, on her thigh, close to her hip. The skin around them was already swelling, turning an ugly purple. I swallowed hard, my mind reeling. We need to get back to the group. A healer, no time. Mora's voice was flat final. I met her eyes, searching for doubt, but there was none. You know this venom? She breathed through gritted teeth, her words clipped like a report. Viper. Short fangs, fast spread. If it reaches the blood fully, leg dies first, then heart. The reality hit me like another gust. We were alone, miles from help, in a storm that hit everything. My stomach churned. I fumbled for my bandage roll in my pack, fingers numb from cold and fear. Mora grabbed my wrist, her grip like iron despite the pain. She pulled me closer, her golden eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that pinned me in place. There was no room for hesitation in that stare. Listen to me, Kyle. Her words were heavy, each one a command. You have to suck the venom out. Now. I froze, my mind blanking. I what? Her face contorted as another wave of pain hit, but she held my gaze. If you wait, I won't walk. We'll both die here. You want that? No. Gods, no. But the thought of it, putting my mouth to her skin, drawing out the poison, made my skin crawl, not just because of the risk, the taste of blood and venom, but because she was an orc, a stranger, a female orc, and I was me. A human map maker who'd never even bandaged a serious wound before. I'm not sure I can... My voice cracked, rain mixing with sweat on my face. Mora's breath came faster now, but she didn't waver. Tear the fabric, expose the bite, suck, spit it out, don't swallow, do it quick. Her order snapped me out of it. Survival mode kicked in. The same instinct that had gotten me through lost trails before. I tore at the cloth around the wound, careful not to jostle her too much. The skin was hot to the touch, swollen and slick with rain and blood. The metallic scent hit me, sharp and nauseating. I leaned down, heart hammering, my lips pressed against the punctures. I sucked hard, feeling the warm, bitter fluid fill my mouth, blood mixed with something acrid, burning my tongue. I turned my head and spat it into the mud, rain washing it away. Again. Suck! Pull with all my might, taste the poison like fire in my throat. Spit! Don't swallow, don't think, just do. Mora's hand rested on my shoulder, not pulling away but steadying me. She breathed raggedly, her eyes squeezed shut for a few beats, then open again, watching the storm as if defying it. Next, she rasped, her voice weaker but still commanding. Need herbs, or it's just delaying. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, the taste lingering like regret. Rain streamed into my eyes, but I nodded. I'll find a place to shelter first. We couldn't stay exposed. I helped her up, slinging her arm over my shoulder. She was heavy, her weight pressing down, but she moved with me, one painful step at a time. The storm raged on, but in that moment it felt like the real battle was between us and the venom coursing through her veins. We found a shallow overhang in the rock face, a hollow, barely deep enough to shield us from the worst of the rain, but better than nothing. The stone was cold and slick, veined with moss that glowed faintly in the dim light filtering through the storm. Wind howled outside, like a beast denied its prey, whipping droplets into the entrance. I helped Mora inside first, easing her down against the back wall. She leaned back with a grunt, her massive frame taking up most of the space, her leg extended awkwardly to avoid pressure on the wound. I spread my oilskin cloak on the ground beneath her, though it was already soaked through. "This'll have to do," I muttered, more to myself than her. My hands were still trembling from the effort of sucking the venom, the bitter taste lingering on my tongue like a bad omen. Mora's breathing was labored, shallow gasps that echoed in the confined space. Her green skin looked paler under the shadows, the swelling on her thigh pushing against the torn fabric. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, fixing me with that unyielding stare. "You did well," she said, her voice rough but steady. "Most humans would have run." I knelt beside her, checking the bite again. The punctures oozed a mix of blood and clear fluid, the skin hot to the touch. "I couldn't leave you," I replied, avoiding her gaze as I unwrapped the makeshift bandage I'd tied earlier. "We're in this together now." She watched me work, not flinching as I cleaned the area with a strip of cloth dipped in rainwater. "Together," she echoed, a hint of skepticism in her tone. "Stonejaw don't say that lightly." I paused, meeting her eyes. "Neither do I. But out here, what choice do we have?" The storm raged on, thunder rumbling like distant war drums. I gave her sips from my water skin, careful not to let her drink too much at once. Venom could make the stomach rebel. She accepted without complaint, though her hand shook slightly when she handed it back. To keep her awake, I started talking. Anything to fill the silence and stave off the chill settling in my bones. When I was a kid in Millhaven, I said, I thought orcs were all mountain giants who ate rocks for breakfast and breathed fire. Stories from the elders, you know, to scare us into staying close to home. Mora's lips twitched, almost a smile, but pain twisted it. And we were taught humans are weak schemers, always hiding behind walls, making pacts they break. She shifted slightly, wincing. But I've seen humans fight, in the border skirmishes before the treaty. Not all weak. I nodded, surprised by her candor. I've never fought. Mapping's my battle. Lines on paper instead of swords. Keeps me out of the real mess. She regarded me thoughtfully. Maps win wars, too. Know the land, know the enemy. We fell into a rhythm of sorts, trading fragments of our lives as the rain drummed endlessly. She told me about her clan, Stonejaw, forged in the crags north of Millhaven, where survival meant strength and loyalty. My father led raids once, she admitted quietly, before peace. He died in one, taught me to trust actions, not words. I shared about my own family, or what was left of it. Lost my parents young. Guild took me and taught me the trade. It's lonely but safe. The words felt inadequate, but in that hollow, they bridged something unspoken. Her condition worsened briefly. The swelling crept higher, her breaths coming shorter. Herbs, she reminded me through gritted teeth. Silverleaf. Underside shimmers like metal. Grows by running water. Crush it, apply wet. I knew I couldn't wait. The storm had eased to a steady pour, visibility marginally better. I'll go, I said, standing. Stay here. Rest. Mora's hand gripped my arm, firm despite her weakness. Come back. I will, I promised, the weight of it settling on me like the rain. I stepped out into the deluge, dagger in hand, using a broken branch as a staff to probe the ground. The forest was a sodden maze. Trees loomed like sentinels. Roots snaked across paths turned to streams. Water cascaded everywhere, but I listened for the distinct gurgle of a steady flow. Northeast, I thought, marking in my mind. Away from the ridge, down the slope where gravity pulled the runoff, the descent was treacherous. My boots sank into mud and I slid twice, scraping my palms on jagged rocks. Pain flared, but I pushed on, rain blinding me. Thunder cracked again, closer, vibrating through my chest. I cursed under my breath. Why me? Why now? But thoughts of Mora alone in that hollow spurred me. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, I heard it, a babbling brook, swollen but not raging. I followed the sound, scrambling over fallen logs slick with moss. There, along the banks, clusters of plants clung to the wet earth. I dropped to my knees, flipping leaves frantically. Green tops, ordinary at first glance. Then, one shimmered underneath, silver like moonlight on steel. I plucked it, sniffed. Sharp, numbing on the tongue. Yes, I gathered a handful, stuffing them into my pouch to keep dry. More thunder rolled, urging me back. The climb up was harder, my legs burning, hands raw. I slipped once more, banging my shin, but gritted my teeth and kept going. Mora's face flashed in my mind, those golden eyes, trusting me in her vulnerability. When I burst back into the overhang, drenched and gasping, she was still there, eyes half closed but alert at my approach. Found it, I panted, dropping to my knees. She nodded weakly. Good. I crushed the leaves against a flat stone, using rainwater to make a paste. Thick, pungent, the scent cutting through the damp air. Carefully, I applied it to the wound, spreading it over the swollen area. Mora hissed as it touched her skin, but she held still, her hand clenching into a fist. Stings, she murmured. It'll help, I assured her, wrapping fresh bandages to hold it in place. Rest now. Let it work. As minutes passed, her breathing steadied. The color returned faintly to her cheeks, the swelling seeming to halt its advance. She opened her eyes fully, looking at me with a new clarity. You didn't have to come back. I said I would. The words came out firmer than I felt. Mora studied me. Why? Humans don't owe orcs. I hesitated, wiping my hands on my cloak. Maybe not, but out here it's not about owing. It's about surviving, and You're not what the stories say." She let out a low chuckle, pained but genuine. "Neither are you. Weak schemer. You just saved an orc's life." We shared a quiet moment, the storm's fury dimming outside. She spoke of her clan's rituals, how venom was a test of endurance, survivors earning scars as badges. I told her about a time I'd gotten lost as a boy, surviving on berries and instinct. The walls between us thinned, words building a fragile bridge. Then, faintly through the rain, a whistle pierced the air, 3 short, 1 long, the guild's signal. Mora's ears perked. "Them!" I whistled back, my heart lifting. Help was coming. But as we waited, I realized this ordeal had bound us in ways maps couldn't chart. With the signal whistles echoing faintly through the fading storm, hope flickered back to life. Mora's condition had stabilized enough, the silver leaf paste cooling the heat in her wound, her breaths deeper and less ragged. But she was far from strong. "We move now," she said, pushing herself up with a grimace. "Before night falls fully." I helped her stand, slinging her arm over my shoulder again. Her weight leaned on me more than before, but she fought it, taking deliberate steps to share the burden. The overhang had kept us dryish, but stepping out meant facing the aftermath. The forest transformed into a sodden labyrinth. Puddles pooled like mirrors reflecting the bruised sky, and the ground squelched underfoot, threatening to swallow our boots. Wind still gusted, though weaker, carrying the scent of wet earth and broken branches. "Follow the whistles," I said, orienting us southeast based on the last signal. My mapmaker's mind kicked in. Note the slope, the flow of water, the position of that jagged rock outcrop. If we got out, I'd redraw this section with warnings, flash floods, hidden roots, viper nests. Mora nodded, her free hand gripping her thigh to steady it. Slow, but steady. We descended carefully, her leg dragging slightly with each step. The path was treacherous. Mudslides had carved new ruts, and fallen limbs blocked what remained of the trail. Once the earth gave way under my foot, a sinkhole of softened soil pulling me down to my knee. I yelped, but Mora's strength held, her arm tightening around me, yanking me free with a grunt of effort. Pain flashed across her face, but she waved off my apology. "Keep going." The wind shifted again, colder now, carrying distant voices. Not hallucinations, real calls. "Kale, Mora!" Oren's voice, hoarse but unmistakable. We pressed on, my arm aching from supporting her, but adrenaline dulled it. Another obstacle, a swollen stream barring our way, water rushing over what used to be stepping stones. "Too fast," Mora assessed, her eyes scanning for a crossing. I spotted a fallen log upstream, half submerged but wide enough. "There, we can bridge it." She eyed it dubiously, but trusted my judgment. We edged along the bank, mud sucking at us. At the log, I went first, testing its stability. Slippery but solid. I reached back and she took my hand, her grip firm despite the venom's toll. Step by step we crossed, water foaming inches below. Midway, a gust nearly toppled us. I braced against her, our faces close, breaths mingling in the chill. "Hold," I whispered. She did, and we made it. On the other side, the whistles grew louder. We crested a small rise, and there they were, the group, clustered in a clearing, faces etched with worry and exhaustion. Oren spotted us first, his eyes widening. "Kyle, Mora, over here!" They rushed forward, hunters with bows slung, merchants trailing behind. Braca, the other orc, reached Mora first, his massive frame dwarfing even her. He supported her other side, relieving me. "Sister," he rumbled, concern cracking his stoic facade. "What happened?" "Viper," Mora replied curtly as if it were a minor scrape. Oren hovered, his map forgotten in his hand. "Gods, we need a healer." "Thorn, your kit!" One of the hunters, Thorn, knelt and inspected the bandage. "Silverleaf, good work. It'll hold till town." He glanced at me, a newfound respect in his gruff nod. "You did this?" I shrugged, wiping mud from my face. "Had to." Braca examined the wound more closely, his brow furrowing. "Clean suck. Proper paste." He looked at me squarely, his voice low. "Human. You saved Stonejaw blood." Mora shot him a look. "He found the leaves, too." The group murmured, attitudes shifting like the wind. No more sidelong glares at the orcs, instead hands clapped my shoulder, water skins offered. The merchants even shared their better rations, dried fruit instead of hardtack. "Thought you were gone," Oren said, relief flooding his features. "The tree split us. We searched for hours." We set up a hasty camp in the clearing, the storm finally breaking into scattered showers. A fire was kindled, risky but necessary for warmth. As dusk fell, we huddled around the flames, steam rising from our clothes. Stories flowed. Thorne recounted a past hunt gone wrong. Oren shared treaty tales. Even Braca joined, grunting about orc endurance rituals in the mountains. Mora sat beside me, not too close, but near enough that the fire's heat bridged the gap. Her presence was a quiet anchor amid the chatter. When the water skin made its round, she took a sip and passed it to me directly, her fingers brushing mine. "Drink," she said softly. I did, the water cool and welcome. "How's the leg?" "Better." She touched the bandage lightly. "Thanks to you." The group quieted as night deepened, exhaustion claiming us. But in that shared silence, something had changed. We weren't just humans and orcs anymore. We were survivors who'd faced Black Pine together. Mora's glance my way lingered a second longer, a wordless acknowledgement. No oaths, no grand declarations, just the quiet bond of shared trial. By morning, the skies cleared. We broke camp and headed back, the path easier now with the group intact. Mora walked with a limp Braca on one side, but she waved him off occasionally, testing her strength. I stayed nearby, mapping the return in my head, new hazards to note like that stream and the viper spots. Millhaven's walls appeared by midday, smoke rising from chimneys like welcoming signals. The guards at the gate eyed us, wet, muddy, one orc limping, but opened without question. Word must have spread ahead. A crowd gathered, whispering about the bonding journey turned survival tale. As we dispersed, Oren clapped my back. "Report to the guild tomorrow. You've earned a bonus." But my thoughts were on Mora. She paused at the healer's door, Braca helping her inside. I waited outside, leaning against the wall until she emerged, wound cleaned, properly bandaged, her step surer. She met my eyes. "We made it." "Yeah," I said, "we did." We reached Millhaven's gates, under a sky that had finally cleared, the sun casting long shadows over the muddy road. The walls loomed familiar and welcoming after Black Pine's chaos, smoke curling from chimneys like signals of normalcy returned. The guards eyed our ragged group, cloaks torn, faces smeared with dirt, Mora limping between Braca and me. But they swung the gates open without the usual questions or delays. Word of the storm must have preceded us. A small crowd gathered at the entrance, murmuring about the bonding journey that had turned into a tale of survival. Oren led us straight to the healer's hut on the town's edge, a squat building with herb bundles hanging from the eaves. The air inside smelled of dried lavender and bitter salves, a stark contrast to the forest's damp rot. Mora was ushered in first, Braca supporting her as the healer. An elderly woman named Alara clucked her tongue and began unwrapping the bandage. I waited outside, leaning against the rough timber wall, my body aching from the ordeal, but my mind buzzing with everything that had happened. The door creaked open after what felt like an eternity. Braca emerged first, his expression a mix of relief and Orcish stoicism. He nodded at me curtly. "She'll mend. Good leaves you found." Then he strode off toward the inn where the Stonejaw representatives were lodged, his heavy steps fading into the bustle of the street. Mora followed, her limp less pronounced now, the wound cleaned and rebound in fresh linen. Alara hovered behind her, pressing a small vial into her hand. "Drink this twice a day. Rest that leg, orc or not." Mora pocketed it without a word, her golden eyes finding mine. She stood there for a beat, the crowd's whispers a distant hum. "We made it back," she said, her voice steady, though fatigue edged it. "Yeah," I replied, pushing off the wall. My hands fidgeted with my map pouch, unsure what came next. Part of me expected some formal acknowledgement, a handshake, a guild report, something to wrap up the bonding. But Mora didn't operate on human customs. She tilted her head slightly, studying me. "You swallowed any?" I blinked, caught off guard. "No, I spat it all." She nodded once, satisfied. Good. The simplicity of it eased something in me, pulling me back from the storm's intensity to a grounded reality. No dramatics, just a practical check, like ensuring a knot was tied right. I cleared my throat. "How's the pain?" "Bearable." She touched the bandage lightly, then met my gaze again. "Kyle." I straightened. "Yeah?" "Next expedition the guild plans," she said, her words measured. "You going?" I hesitated, the question hanging between us. "If they call me." Mora shook her head faintly as if dissatisfied with the evasion. Not if they call. Her voice dropped lower, direct. I'm asking. My pulse quickened. It wasn't just about maps or survival anymore. This was her extending a thread, testing if the bridge we'd built in the hollow would hold beyond the forest. I'll go, I said, the words coming out surer than I felt. She held my stare a moment longer, then reached to her neck, unclasping a thin leather cord. Dangling from it was a rough metal shard, hammered flat and etched with a simple tooth mark. A beast's fang, stylized but raw. Not jewelry? Nothing ornate. Just a token, worn and warm from her skin. She placed it in my palm, closing my fingers around it. Stonejaw carry these in the wilds, she explained. Not a charm. A marker. Shows you've walked with us. I felt its weight, solid and unyielding, like her. Questions swirled. Why me? What did it mean? But I understood instinctively. This was her thanks, orc style. No debts proclaimed, no vows, just recognition that I'd earned a place in her clan's memory. I'll keep it, I said, slipping the cord over my head. It settled against my chest, a new constant. Mora turned to leave, her braid swaying with each step. But she paused after a few paces, not looking back. That bite yesterday. You did right. The words landed like a quiet thunderclap. I stood there, rain-washed streets blurring around me as she merged into the flow of townsfolk, a green shadow amid gray cloaks. She vanished around a corner, and I was left with the echo. That evening, I returned to my small room above the guild hall, the familiar creak of the stairs a return to routine. I spread my black pine map on the table, ink and quill ready to correct the smudged lines from the storm. But my hand kept drifting to the metal shard, fingers tracing its edge. It wasn't love, not the rushed, storybook kind. No confessions under the rain, no promises sealed with a kiss. What Mora and I shared was deeper, forged in necessity. Trust when death whispered close, actions over words. The journey had started as a guild farce. Humans and orcs pretending unity for a treaty's sake. But in Black Pine, it became real. From her command in the mud, you have to suck the venom out now. To my promise to return with herbs, we'd crossed lines no map could draw. Orcs weren't just warriors to fear. Humans weren't schemers to distrust. We were people, surviving together. As I dipped the quill and redrew the viper-infested stream, I wondered about the next expedition. Would it be the same? Storms, dangers, unspoken bonds, or something more? Mora's question lingered. Not duty, but choice. I tucked the shard under my shirt, its warmth a reminder. Black Pine had changed me, and that one sentence, raw and urgent, would echo whenever I stepped into the wilds again.